The fluorescent lights in the Huntsville unit cast harsh shadows across the polished floor as Officer Maya Reynolds walked down the corridor for what she thought would be a routine shift. She was 26, fresh out of the academy, her blonde hair pulled back in a tight regulation bun that emphasized her sharp blue eyes. The veteran guards had warned her about Block D, where inmates facing their final days were held, but nothing could have prepared her for the request that would come from Cell 47. Marcus Williams sat on the edge of his metal bunk, his tall, athletic frame somehow diminished by the weight of what awaited him. At 38, his powerful build still spoke of the basketball player he'd once been, the man who dominated courts in high school before life took him down a darker path. His dark eyes carried something Maya had never seen in a prisoner before. Not anger, not the usual resignation she'd learned to recognize in her brief time here. Something else entirely. Something that looked almost like hope mixed with desperate urgency. "Officer Reynolds," he said quietly as she approached for the routine wellness check, his deep voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "I need to ask you something. Something they said you might be the only one who'd understand." Maya's hand instinctively moved to her radio, muscle memory from academy training kicking in automatically. But there was no threat in his posture, no calculation in his expression that suggested manipulation, just an urgency that made her pause mid-reach. She had 6 months on the job. 6 months of following protocol, of keeping emotional distance, of never letting inmates see weakness or vulnerability. 6 months of being told that compassion was dangerous in a place like this. "I'm listening," she heard herself say, though every training manual screamed at her to walk away and report this interaction to her supervisor immediately. Marcus stood slowly, his 6'4" frame unfolding with careful deliberation, moving with the practiced awareness of someone who knew that sudden movements could be misinterpreted as threats. He moved to the small metal desk bolted to the wall and picked up a piece of paper, folded so many times the creases had nearly torn through the thin material. His calloused hands, marked by decades of hard labor and whatever life he'd lived before these walls, trembled slightly as he held it like it was the most precious thing in the world. "They say I got 72 hours left," he said, his voice dropping to barely a whisper that Maya had to lean closer to hear. "Maybe less if the appeals court doesn't come through. The lawyers are done fighting. The petitions are finished." He looked directly at her then, and Maya felt something shift in the air between them, a weight settling on her shoulders she couldn't quite name. "But there's something I need you to do, something that can't wait another day." Maya knew she should call for the senior officer. She knew she should follow procedure, document this interaction, and let someone with more experience handle whatever this was about to become. But something in Marcus Williams's eyes held her frozen in place, unable to move or look away. "What is it?" Maya asked, surprised to find her voice steadier than she felt inside, her heart hammering against her ribs. Marcus extended the folded paper through the bars with both hands, as if offering something sacred, but didn't release it when her fingers touched the edge. The moment hung between them, neither moving, the paper suspended in the small space that separated their two worlds. "Before I tell you," he said carefully, "you need to understand something important. This request, this favor I'm about to ask, it's not what you think it is. It's not for me." The lights flickered overhead, and somewhere down the corridor, a door slammed with metallic finality that echoed through the empty wing. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs as she met his gaze, neither of them letting go of that paper, suspended between them like a bridge between two impossible choices. She could see the desperation in his eyes now, mixed with something that looked like peace, as if he'd already accepted whatever fate awaited him, but needed this one thing resolved first. "Then who's it for?" she whispered, barely able to get the words out. Marcus Williams' jaw tightened, the muscles working as he fought for control, and for the first time since she'd walked up to his cell, she saw tears forming in his eyes. Real tears. Not the manipulation she'd been warned about, not the performance some inmates put on. These were genuine, raw, the kind that came from a place too deep for pretense. "That's what I need you to find out," he said, his voice breaking on the last word. Maya felt her professional composure slipping. Every instinct told her this was different from the usual requests, the usual games. There was something here that transcended the normal boundaries of her job, something that demanded she listen, even though she knew she shouldn't. "I don't understand," she said, still holding the edge of that paper, still unable to let go or pull away. "You will," Marcus promised, and slowly released his grip on the paper, letting it transfer completely into her possession. "You will when you read what's written there, when you understand what I'm really asking, and when you do, Officer Reynolds, you're going to have to make a choice that's going to change someone's life forever." The weight of the paper in her hand felt impossibly heavy now, as if secrets and truth and consequences had actual mass that could be measured. Maya looked down at it, then back up at Marcus, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time since she'd started this shift. Not just an inmate, not just a number or a case file, but a human being with a story she didn't yet know, holding on to something important enough to matter in his final hours. "What kind of choice?" she asked, though part of her didn't want to know the answer. Marcus stepped back from the bars, giving her space, giving her room to breathe and think. "The kind," he said quietly, "that determines whether the truth matters more than peace, whether knowing something is better than believing a comfortable lie, whether one woman deserves to know what really happened 15 years ago, even if that truth destroys the life she's built since. Bet, before we discover what Marcus Williams's mysterious request truly meant, we'd love to know where our listeners are from around the world. Drop a comment telling us your location, and if this story moves you, leave a like to help us share more stories of redemption and humanity. Now back to Marcus's story. Melissa. Maya's fingers finally closed completely around the paper as she pulled her hand back through the bars, breaking the physical connection between them, but not the invisible thread of obligation that now bound them together. The texture was soft, worn from being handled countless times, folded and unfolded in quiet moments when no one was watching. She could see writing through the thin material, dense text that covered what looked like both sides of the page, but before she could unfold it to read, Marcus spoke again with renewed urgency. "That paper," he said, his voice cracking slightly with emotion he could no longer contain, "has an address on it, a place about 40 minutes from here, just outside Austin. Small house on the edge of town, painted blue with white trim. There's a garden in front that someone tends carefully, roses mostly, and inside that house lives someone who needs to hear what I have to say before it's too late for both of us." "Marcus, I can't just leave my post and drive to some random address because—" Maya began, falling back on protocol even as she felt it slipping away from her grasp. "I'm not asking you to break rules, Officer Reynolds," he interrupted gently but firmly. "I'm asking you to deliver a message, one message, to someone who needs to hear it before I run out of time. Before the clock runs out and this truth dies with me in this cell." He paused, swallowing hard, his Adam's apple bobbing with the effort of controlling his emotions. "Before she spends one more day living with guilt that isn't hers to carry." Maya glanced down the empty corridor, calculating time and risk. Her shift supervisor wouldn't make rounds for another 20 minutes, and the security cameras in this section had blind spots she'd noticed during her orientation. She knew she should walk away right now, file a report about an inmate making unusual requests, and let the chaplain or the prison counselor handle whatever this was. But something in Marcus's desperation felt fundamentally different from the usual manipulation she'd been trained to recognize and dismiss. "Who lives there?" she asked quietly, committing herself to this conversation even as warning bells rang in her head. "A woman named Sarah Mitchell," Marcus said, and the way he spoke her name with such careful reverence told Maya this was no casual connection. She's 42 years old now, works as a teacher at Lincoln Elementary School, 3rd grade, volunteers at the local library on weekends, has a daughter she loves more than anything in this world, and she doesn't know I exist, Officer Reynolds. She has no idea who I am or what I saw that night 15 years ago. Maya felt her pulse quicken, professional curiosity mixing with personal interest, despite her best efforts to remain detached. What night? What did you see? Marcus moved closer to the bars again, his imposing frame somehow seeming vulnerable in the dim light that made everything in this place look grey and lifeless. 15 years ago, something happened that changed her life forever. Something terrible that she's blamed herself for every single day since. Something she's been carrying alone all this time, crushing her under weight that was never supposed to be hers. He gripped the bars now, his knuckles turning lighter against his dark skin. And I'm the only person alive who knows the truth about what really happened that night. The only one who can lift that burden off her shoulders before I'm gone. And you know about it, because Maya's training kicked in harder now, her voice taking on an edge of professional suspicion that felt safer than the empathy threatening to overwhelm her judgment. Because I was there, Marcus said simply, the words landing between them like stones dropping into still water. I saw what really happened that night. I saw who was actually responsible. And I saw Sarah Mitchell walk into a nightmare that wasn't of her making, then spend 15 years accepting blame for something she didn't do, couldn't have prevented, and should never have been asked to carry. The paper felt heavier in Maya's hand suddenly, as if the weight of secrets and hidden truths could have actual physical mass that pressed against her palm. She looked at Marcus Williams, really looked at him for the first time, trying to reconcile the condemned man standing before her with whatever story lay folded in her grasp. Trying to understand how this man, this stranger, facing his final days, could hold the key to another person's freedom from guilt. Why me? She asked, the question that had been building since this conversation started. Why not the chaplain who visits every week? Why not your lawyer who has access to investigators and resources? Why not the warden who has the authority to actually help you if this is legitimate? Marcus's expression softened, and something like hope flickered in his dark eyes, fragile as candlelight in wind. Because they'd try to use it, he said with certainty born from experience. The chaplain would make it about redemption and saving my soul. The lawyer would try to leverage it for appeals or stays or buying more time. The warden would see it as a security issue or a liability. They'd all turn it into something it's not, make it about me when it has nothing to do with me anymore. He gestured to her young face, her relatively new uniform with its still crisp creases. But you, Officer Reynolds, you haven't learned to stop seeing people yet. You still believe truth matters more than procedure. You still think that doing the right thing is more important than following the safe path. Maya's throat tightened because he was absolutely right and they both knew it. 6 months wasn't long enough to build the emotional walls the veteran guards carried like armor. 6 months wasn't long enough to stop caring about individual stories, to stop seeing inmates as people with histories and families and reasons for ending up here. 6 months wasn't long enough to become cynical about whether justice and truth still meant anything in a system that often felt designed to process people rather than help them. But was 6 months long enough to know when she was being played? Was it long enough to distinguish genuine desperation from sophisticated manipulation? Maya had heard stories from the senior officers about inmates who could lie with tears in their eyes, who could manufacture sincerity that felt absolutely real until you discovered it was all performance designed to exploit exactly this kind of compassion. I need to think about this, she said, but even as the words left her mouth, she knew she was already halfway to saying yes. Marcus nodded slowly, as if he'd expected this response, and respected it. I understand. But Officer Reynolds, there's something else you need to know before you decide. Something that makes this urgent beyond just my situation. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Sarah Mitchell has a daughter now, 8 years old. Beautiful little girl named Emma, who loves reading and draws pictures of families that include a brother she never met. Maya felt ice water pour down her spine. A brother? His name was Tommy, Marcus said softly, and the name hung in the air between them like a ghost. He was 6 years old when he died, and Sarah has spent 15 years believing it was her fault. Besides, that night, Maya sat in her small apartment staring at the folded paper on her coffee table as if it might suddenly burst into flames or vanish like something from a dream. Her phone lay next to it, the screen dark but filled with possibility and danger in equal measure. She'd looked up Detective James Morrison, the name Marcus had given her in the retired officers' database. He'd been a decorated investigator with Austin PD, 30 years on the force before retiring 5 years ago with commendations for solving difficult cases. He was real. The name wasn't fabricated. That much at least checked out. But did she really want to make this call? Did she really want to know if Marcus Williams's story was true? Because if it was true, if every word written on that paper currently sitting on her coffee table was accurate, then everything about the case that had made headlines 15 years ago was wrong. Everything the courts had decided, everything the media had reported, everything Sarah Mitchell believed about that terrible night that had stolen her son, all of it would be revealed as fundamentally, tragically incorrect. Maya picked up her phone, her thumb hovering over the call button, as she'd been doing for the past 20 minutes. Outside her window, Austin's lights twinkled like distant stars in the Texas darkness. And somewhere out there, in one of those lit windows, Sarah Mitchell was probably tucking her 8-year-old daughter into bed, probably kissing her forehead the way mothers do, probably saying an extra prayer the way mothers who've lost children always do, holding on a little tighter, staying a few minutes longer, unable to take a single moment for granted. The son who died because of a choice Sarah thought she'd made, a choice that had shaped every moment of the last 15 years of her life, a choice that had defined her as a mother, as a woman, as a human being trying to live with impossible guilt. Maya pressed the call button before she could change her mind. The phone rang once, sounding impossibly loud in her quiet apartment. Twice, giving her a chance to hang up and pretend this had never happened. 3 times, and she was committed now, crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. "Morrison," a gruff voice answered, suspicious and tired in the way of men who've seen too much darkness in their careers. "Detective Morrison, this is Officer Maya Reynolds from Huntsville Unit," she said, forcing her voice to sound professional and confident. "I need to ask you about a case from 2010. A case involving a boy named Tommy Mitchell and the night he—" "Stop right there," Morrison interrupted, his voice suddenly cold as winter. "Why are you calling me about Tommy Mitchell? That case was closed 15 years ago. What's this about, Officer Reynolds?" Maya's breath caught in her throat at the immediate recognition, the way he'd said the name without hesitation, despite 15 years passing. "Because I have an inmate here who claims he knows what really happened that night. Marcus Williams. He says he was there. He says he saw everything. And, sir, if what he's telling me is true, if what he's written in this letter is accurate, then Sarah Mitchell has been living with guilt that—" The silence on the other end stretched so long, Maya thought the call had dropped, that Morrison had hung up, rather than engage with this conversation. She was about to speak again when his voice came back, barely above a whisper, carrying weight that made her sit up straighter. "Which cell is Williams in?" "Cell 47, Block D," Maya answered. "But Detective Morrison, I need to know if—" "I'll be there in 2 hours, he cut her off. "Don't talk to Williams again until I arrive. Don't show that letter to anyone else. Don't make any copies. Don't do anything except wait for me, understood?" His voice carried a warning now, the authority of decades of experience. "And Officer Reynolds, you need to understand something before we go any further down this road. That case destroyed lives, tore apart a family, broke people who were already barely holding on. reopening it, bringing up all those memories and questions and pain that won't bring anyone peace or closure or whatever you think truth is supposed to provide. But what if the truth is, Maya started, needing to finish the thought. The truth, Morrison cut her off again, his voice hard as granite, isn't always what people need, Officer Reynolds. Sometimes the truth is just another burden to carry. Sometimes people are better off not knowing. Sometimes mercy matters more than accuracy. You're young. You still think truth is this pure thing that automatically makes everything better. But I've been doing this long enough to know that sometimes truth destroys more than it heals. And the line went dead, and Maya sat staring at her phone, her mind racing through implications and consequences. Morrison's reaction had confirmed her worst fear and her deepest hope simultaneously. Marcus Williams wasn't lying. The story was real. Whatever had happened that night 15 years ago, whatever Marcus had witnessed, it was significant enough that a retired detective remembered it immediately and was willing to drive 2 hours in the middle of the night to discuss it. Which meant Sarah Mitchell really had been living with false guilt for 15 years. Which meant Maya now held the power to free her from that burden or to preserve the peace she'd built in ignorance. Which meant the choice Morrison had warned her about was real and immediate and impossible. Maya didn't sleep that night. Not even for a few minutes. She sat at her kitchen table with Marcus's letter spread out before her, reading and rereading the careful handwriting until she had every word memorized, every detail burned into her memory. The story he told was both devastatingly simple and impossibly complex, the kind of truth that seemed impossible until you saw how perfectly all the pieces fit together, how every detail aligned with a version of events that made terrible, tragic sense. 15 years ago, Sarah Mitchell had been a young mother, struggling to hold her world together by her fingernails. She'd been 27, the same age Maya was now, with a beautiful 6-year-old boy named Tommy who loved dinosaurs and baseball and asking endless questions about how everything worked. She'd been working 2 jobs trying to keep their small house, fighting through a difficult divorce from a husband who'd decided fatherhood was too hard and marriage too confining. Money was always tight. Time was always short. And Sarah was always exhausted, always stretched too thin, always one crisis away from breaking completely. On the night of October 14th, 2010, she'd made a choice that would haunt her forever. A choice that would define the rest of her life. Tommy had been running a fever, crying about his ear hurting, clearly suffering from an infection that needed medicine. The pharmacy closed at 9. It was 8:30. Sarah had called every neighbor she could think of to watch Tommy for 45 minutes while she made the run. But no one answered their phones. She'd stood in her small living room, Tommy crying in his bedroom, the clock ticking toward closing time, and made a decision that millions of parents make every day but pray never goes wrong. She'd left Tommy alone for 45 minutes to run to the pharmacy for his medication. In those 45 minutes, someone had broken into their house. Tommy had been found in his bedroom when Sarah returned, and she'd arrived home to sirens and flashing lights and a nightmare that would never end, that would color every moment of every day for the rest of her life. The guilt had consumed her like fire. The judgment from neighbors, from the media, from the courts, from herself, most of all. She'd moved to Austin to escape the whispers and pointing fingers. She'd changed her name to shed the identity of the mother who'd left her son alone. She'd rebuilt her life piece by piece, but the weight of that choice never left her shoulders for a single moment. Marcus's letter said something completely different. It said Sarah hadn't left Tommy alone at all. It said there had been someone else in the house that night, someone Sarah had trusted, someone who'd offered to watch Tommy while she ran to the pharmacy, someone who'd seemed like the answer to her desperate prayers, but who'd brought nightmare instead of help. And Marcus had seen it all from across the street, had watched the whole terrible sequence of events unfold, had known the truth from the very beginning, but had been powerless to do anything about it because of who he was and what his word was worth in the eyes of the law. Icky. At 3 in the morning, Maya's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, the sudden vibration making her jump after hours of silent reading and thinking. The message was brief. Officer Reynolds, this is Detective Morrison. I'm in the parking lot of your building. We need to talk before my meeting with Williams. Come down now. Don't bring the letter. Maya grabbed her jacket despite the Texas heat and headed downstairs, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. In the poorly lit parking lot that smelled of asphalt and old oil stains, she found an older man in his 60s leaning against a dark sedan, his face lined with years of carrying other people's tragedies, of knowing things he wished he could forget. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with grey hair and eyes that had seen too much darkness to ever be completely at ease again. "Officer Reynolds," he said as she approached, not offering his hand or any of the normal pleasantries that usually accompanied first meetings. "Before we go any further, before you get more involved in this than you already are, I need you to understand something about Marcus Williams and that night and what really happened." "I'm listening," Maya said, wrapping her arms around herself despite the warm night. Morrison looked up at the sky, at the stars barely visible through Austin's light pollution and the haze of humidity that hung in the air. "Marcus Williams was my confidential informant back then," he began, his voice carrying the weight of old regrets. "He'd been in and out of the system since he was 17. Drug charges mostly, nothing violent, just a kid who'd made bad choices and was trying to find his way back to something better. He'd been clean for 6 months when I recruited him. Smart guy, observant, good memory for details. He helped us make cases against dealers, gave us information that saved lives by getting dangerous people off the streets. And the night Tommy Mitchell died," Maya prompted when he paused too long. Morrison's jaw tightened. "The night Tommy Mitchell was hurt, Marcus was supposed to meet me 3 blocks from Sarah's house. We had a dealer working that neighborhood, guy named Luis Vega, who was selling to high school kids. Marcus had information about a major delivery that night, the kind of bust that could take down a whole distribution network. He was supposed to be there at 8:15, but he was late. And when he finally showed up at 8:45, he was shaking, covered in sweat, saying he'd seen something terrible, and we had to get to Sarah Mitchell's house immediately." Maya felt her breath catch. What had he seen? "He'd seen everything," Morrison said quietly, finally looking at her directly. "He'd seen who was really in that house. He'd seen what had really happened to Tommy, and he'd seen Sarah Mitchell arrive home to a scene that would destroy her life." He paused, his expression pained. "But by the time we got there, by the time we could verify anything Marcus was saying, the narrative was already set in stone. The police, on scene, had already decided what had happened based on the evidence they could see. Sarah Mitchell had left her son alone. That was the story. That was what everyone believed because it fit the facts as they appeared. And Marcus, this kid with a drug record and a history of legal troubles, his word wasn't going to change anyone's mind about anything." "Darteen, but you believed him," Maya said, knowing it was true from the way he spoke. Morrison nodded slowly, the motion seeming to cost him something. "I believed him because I knew Marcus. I knew when he was lying and when he was telling the truth. I knew his tells, his patterns, the way his voice changed when he was scared versus when he was manipulating. And that night, Officer Reynolds, Marcus Williams was telling the absolute truth about what he'd witnessed. I would have staked my career on it. Hell, I did stake my career on it. I fought for months to get someone to listen, to reopen the investigation, to look at the evidence from a different angle. And you know what happened." "They didn't believe you," Maya whispered. "Worse, they didn't want to believe me, because reopening that case, admitting we might have been wrong about what happened, that would have meant exposing the department to liability. It would have meant admitting that Sarah Mitchell had been carrying false guilt while the person actually responsible went free. It would have meant everything we'd told the media, everything we'd said in court, all of it would be revealed as either incompetence or cover-up." Morrison's voice turned bitter. "So they buried it. They buried Marcus's testimony. They buried the evidence that contradicted the official story. They buried the truth because it was easier than dealing with the consequences of being wrong. Why? Maya felt her world tilting, everything she'd believed about justice and truth, and the system she'd joined suddenly looking different in the harsh light of Morrison's words. So Sarah Mitchell has been living with guilt for something that wasn't her fault for 15 years, and everyone in power knew but chose to do nothing. That's one way to look at it, Morrison said carefully, his voice taking on a defensive edge. Another way is that Sarah Mitchell built a new life after the tragedy. She went to therapy. She processed her grief. She eventually met someone new and had another child. She found work she loves. She found something that looks like peace from the outside. He met Maya's eyes with an intensity that felt almost physical. Are you absolutely certain she needs to know the truth now? Are you sure that knowing will help her heal rather than destroy everything she's built since that night? The question hung in the cold parking lot air like a living thing, pulsing with implications and consequences that stretched out in every direction. Maya thought about Marcus Williams in his cell, counting down his final hours with nothing left to lose and everything to give. She thought about Sarah Mitchell, tucking her daughter Emma into bed, probably saying an extra prayer the way mothers who've lost children always do, holding on tight to what she still had while carrying the crushing weight of what she believed she'd lost through her own failure. Doesn't she deserve to know? Maya asked, but the question came out weaker than she'd intended. Morrison sighed, a sound that seemed to carry decades of similar questions without good answers. Deserve has nothing to do with it, Officer Reynolds. This isn't about what people deserve or what justice demands or what truth requires. This is about whether knowing something will make someone's life better or worse. And that is something you're going to have to decide, because I can't make that choice for you anymore. I'm retired, I'm out, but you're standing at the beginning of this story, and you get to decide how it ends. He pushed off from his car and started toward the building entrance, then paused and turned back to face her. I'll talk to Marcus in the morning. I'll verify his story is the same as it was 15 years ago. I'll tell you whether I think he's being honest or trying to manipulate you for some last-minute purpose I can't figure out. But Officer Reynolds, Maya, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that he's telling the complete truth. And when you know for certain that he is, when you can't hide behind doubt or skepticism anymore, you're going to have to choose between giving Sarah Mitchell the truth that will free her from guilt or protecting the peace she's found in ignorance. How did you choose? Maya asked quietly. 15 years ago, when you knew Marcus was telling the truth, what did you do? Beige, Morrison's expression hardened into something that looked like old pain turned to scar tissue. I chose wrong, he said simply. I chose to protect the system instead of protecting Sarah Mitchell. I chose institutional stability over individual justice, and I've regretted it every single day since. He started walking again, his footsteps echoing in the empty parking lot. Don't make the same mistake I did, Officer Reynolds. When you choose, make sure you can live with that choice for the next 15 years. Make sure you can look at yourself in the mirror and know you did the right thing, whatever you decide right is. Maya stood alone in the parking lot long after Morrison disappeared into the building, her mind spinning through scenarios and consequences and impossible choices. The night air pressed against her skin, thick with humidity and the weight of secrets that were older than her career, older than her certainty about right and wrong, older than her belief that truth automatically healed wounds rather than sometimes making them worse. Somewhere in the distance a siren wailed, another emergency in a city full of them, another crisis demanding attention and action and choices made without enough information or time. Maya looked up at her apartment window, dark against the building's facade, knowing the letter still waited on her coffee table like a test she hadn't studied for, like a question with no good answers. like a responsibility she'd never asked for but could no longer avoid. The morning sun barely penetrated the thick windows of Huntsville Unit as Maya walked back through the security checkpoints, her mind still churning from the conversation with Morrison hours earlier. She'd managed maybe an hour of restless sleep on her couch, the letter still on her coffee table like an accusation. Now she watched through the observation glass as Morrison sat across from Marcus Williams in the small interview room, their conversation inaudible, but their body language speaking volumes she couldn't quite interpret. Marcus leaned forward, hands clasped on the metal table, speaking with an intensity that made his whole body seem engaged in the effort of communication. Morrison sat back, arms crossed initially, but as the conversation progressed, Maya saw his posture change. The defensive stance melted away, his arms uncrossed. He leaned in. At one point, he put his head in his hands, and Maya saw his shoulders shake in what could only be suppressed emotion. After 45 minutes, Morrison emerged from the interview room, looking 10 years older than when he'd entered. His eyes found Maya immediately, and he gestured for her to follow him to an empty conference room down the hall. Once inside, with the door closed, he pulled out a chair and sat heavily, as if his legs could no longer support his weight. "It's all true," he said without preamble, his voice rough. "Every word Marcus told you, every detail in that letter. I spent 45 minutes trying to find inconsistencies, testing his memory against what I knew from the case files, looking for any sign he'd fabricated or embellished or gotten things wrong, but he didn't. If anything, he remembers details I'd forgotten. Things no one could know unless they'd actually been there that night." Maya sat down across from him, her hands trembling slightly as she placed them flat on the table to steady them. "Tell me what really happened. Tell me the truth that Marcus saw." Morrison looked at her for a long moment, seeming to measure whether she was truly ready for this burden. Then he began to speak, his voice taking on the careful precision of a detective recounting facts for a report, though the emotion beneath the professional tone was unmistakable. "Sarah Mitchell didn't leave Tommy alone that night," he started. "Her neighbor, a woman named Patricia Brennan, lived in the apartment next door. Patricia was 63, seemed kind and grandmotherly, had watched Tommy a few times before when Sarah was desperate. When Sarah got the call from the pharmacy that they were about to close and she needed to pick up Tommy's medication, she panicked. She knocked on Patricia's door. Patricia answered, saw Sarah's distress, and offered to sit with Tommy for the 45 minutes Sarah would be gone. It seemed like a blessing. Sarah thanked her profusely and ran to make it to the pharmacy before closing. Maya felt her chest tighten, knowing this story couldn't end well, but needing to hear it anyway. Morrison continued, his voice growing quieter, forcing Maya to lean forward to catch every word. "Marcus was stationed across the street, waiting for me, watching for Luis Vega. He saw Sarah leave. He saw Patricia enter the apartment. And then, about 10 minutes later, he saw someone else arrive, Patricia's son, Kyle Brennan. 32 years old, history of violence, restraining orders from 2 ex-girlfriends, suspected but never charged in several assault cases. Patricia had called him to come over, saying she needed help with something." "Oh, God," Maya whispered, already understanding where this was going. Kyle was high that night. Meth, we determined later, though it took weeks to get toxicology reports. He was paranoid, aggressive, looking for something to steal to fund his next fix. Marcus watched him go into the apartment. He heard shouting even from across the street. He saw Patricia come to the window, looking panicked, trying to wave Kyle away from Tommy's room. And then, Morrison paused, his jaw working as he forced himself to continue. Then he heard Tommy scream. A child's scream that Marcus said haunted him every night for 15 years. He started running toward the house, but he was too late. By the time he reached the door, Kyle was running out the back. Patricia was crying in the hallway, and Tommy was in his bedroom, hurt and scared and calling for his mother who wasn't there. "And Maya pressed her hands harder against the table, needing the solid surface to ground her against the wave of nausea that threatened to overwhelm her. And when Sarah came back? Sarah arrived to chaos, Morrison said, his voice hollow now, as if recounting this was draining something essential from him. Sirens everywhere, police cars, an ambulance. Neighbors standing outside in bathrobes and pajamas, whispering and staring. She ran inside to find Tommy being treated by paramedics, crying for her, asking why she'd left him. And Patricia, that manipulative, protective mother of a monster, she looked Sarah in the eyes and lied. She said Sarah had left Tommy alone. She said she'd heard crying and had come over to check, finding the back door open and Tommy hurt in his room. She said she'd called 911 immediately. Why would Patricia lie? Maya asked, though she already knew the answer. To protect her son, Morrison said simply. Kyle had run. He'd disappeared into the night, and Patricia knew if anyone discovered he'd been there, he'd go to prison for a very long time. So she lied. She made Sarah the villain to save her own child, and Sarah, devastated and guilty about leaving Tommy even for 45 minutes, accepted the blame without question. She believed she deserved it. She believed this was her punishment for making a choice that millions of parents make, but pray never goes wrong. Maya thought about her own mother, about the times she'd been left with neighbors or babysitters, about the ordinary acts of trust that held society together, and how one betrayal could shatter everything. And Marcus saw all of this. Morrison nodded heavily. Marcus saw everything. He saw Kyle arrive. He saw him go into the house. He heard Tommy scream. He saw Kyle run away. He saw Patricia lie to the first officers on scene. And when I finally arrived, and he told me everything, I believed him completely. But no one else did. No one wanted to believe that Patricia Brennan, this sweet old woman who brought cookies to church socials, could be capable of such calculated deception. Where is Patricia now? Maya asked. Dead, Morrison said flatly. Cancer took her 8 years ago. She died without ever admitting what really happened, without ever confessing to the lie that destroyed Sarah Mitchell's life. Kyle is dead too. Overdosed 6 years ago in a motel room in Oklahoma, so the only people who know the complete truth are me, Marcus, and now you. The weight of that knowledge settled on Maya's shoulders like physical mass, pressing down until she felt like she might collapse under it. 3 people in the entire world knew that Sarah Mitchell had spent 15 years carrying guilt that should never have been hers. 3 people knew that she'd been betrayed by someone she'd trusted, lied about by someone who'd seemed kind, and abandoned by a system that chose convenience over truth. What do we do now? Maya whispered, though she knew there was no we anymore. Morrison had made his choice 15 years ago. Marcus would make his choice in his final hours. This decision belonged to her alone. Morrison stood slowly, moving like a man whose bones ached with more than physical pain. That's up to you, Officer Reynolds. Marcus asked you to deliver his message because he knew I'd already failed Sarah once. He wants someone with fresh eyes, someone who hasn't been compromised by the system, someone who might actually do the right thing. He walked to the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. I'll support whatever you decide. If you choose to tell Sarah, I'll verify Marcus's account. I'll explain what I saw 15 years ago and why I didn't fight harder. And if you choose to let her keep living in ignorance, I'll take this secret to my grave alongside Marcus. How can I possibly make this choice? Maya asked, hearing the desperation in her own voice. How can I decide whether someone deserves truth or peace when I don't even know which one would actually help her? Morrison turned back to face her, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw something like compassion in his tired eyes. You make the choice the same way all of us make impossible choices, Maya. You imagine both futures. You picture Sarah Mitchell hearing the truth, learning she's carried false guilt for 15 years, discovering she was betrayed and lied to by someone she trusted. And you picture Sarah Mitchell never knowing, continuing to build her life on the foundation of false guilt, but finding happiness anyway, raising her daughter, teaching her students, maybe even finding something like peace in acceptance. Then you ask yourself which future you could live with creating, which choice would let you sleep at night, which decision would make you the person you want to be. He left then, closing the door quietly behind him, and Maya sat alone in the conference room with the weight of another person's entire life hanging in the balance of her decision. Outside the narrow window, she could see the prison yard, inmates moving through their routines, guards watching from towers, the whole vast machinery of justice grinding forward with or without truth, with or without mercy, with or without her. Unbearable. Maya spent her lunch break sitting in her car in the prison parking lot. The letter from Marcus spread across her steering wheel, reading it again even though she'd already memorized every word. The handwriting was surprisingly elegant for someone who'd spent so much of his life incarcerated. Each letter carefully formed, each word chosen with precision. This wasn't the rambling confession of a desperate man looking for last-minute redemption. This was a careful, detailed accounting of truth, witnessed and carried in silence for too long. Her phone buzzed with a text from her supervisor asking where she was, reminding her that her break had ended 5 minutes ago. Maya ignored it, continuing to stare at the address written at the bottom of the letter. 1247, Maple Street, Austin, Texas. Sarah Mitchell's house, the place where a woman lived who didn't know that her entire understanding of the worst night of her life was built on lies. Making a decision that felt both inevitable and impossible, Maya pulled out her personal phone and opened the search browser. She typed in Sarah Mitchell's name, not sure what she was looking for, but needing to see this woman whose fate she held in her hands. The search results populated quickly. There were several Sarah Mitchells in Texas, but only one matched the age and location Marcus had specified. A LinkedIn profile appeared first. Sarah Mitchell, third-grade teacher at Lincoln Elementary School. The profile picture showed a woman with kind eyes and a warm smile, blonde hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, wearing a cheerful yellow blouse that suggested someone who'd chosen to work with children despite, or perhaps because of her own loss. Her profile description read, "Passionate about early childhood education and helping every student discover their unique gifts. Every child deserves to be seen, heard, and valued." Maya clicked through to Facebook, finding a profile set to public that revealed more pieces of Sarah's reconstructed life. Photos of a little girl with dark curls and Sarah's same warm smile, Emma at her 8th birthday party just 3 weeks ago. Pictures of a small garden, those roses Marcus had mentioned, carefully tended and blooming despite the Texas heat. Posts about her students' achievements, carefully worded to protect their privacy, but glowing with pride. A photo from 6 months ago of Sarah and Emma at the zoo, both laughing at something off camera, looking genuinely happy. This was the life Sarah had built on the foundation of guilt and grief. This was what she'd managed to create, despite believing herself responsible for her son's death. And Maya had the power to either validate that guilt or shatter the entire foundation and see what remained standing after the truth demolished everything Sarah thought she knew. "Officer Reynolds!" The sharp voice made Maya jump, nearly dropping her phone. Her supervisor, Sergeant Matthews, was standing beside her car window, looking irritated and concerned in equal measure. "Your break ended 10 minutes ago and you're sitting in your car on your phone. Is everything all right?" Maya quickly locked her phone and shoved it into her pocket, then gathered the letter and folded it carefully before tucking it into her jacket. "I'm sorry, Sergeant. I just needed a few extra minutes to handle something personal. It won't happen again." Matthews studied her face with the assessing gaze of someone who'd spent decades reading people. "You look like you haven't slept. And you've been distracted all morning. Several of the other officers mentioned you seemed off during briefing. Want to tell me what's going on?" For a moment, Maya considered telling Matthews everything, unburdening herself of this impossible decision, letting someone with more experience and authority take the weight off her shoulders. But then she remembered Morrison's warning about how the system would handle this. They'd make it about liability and exposure, about protecting the department from lawsuits and bad press. They'd turn Sarah Mitchell's truth into an institutional problem to be managed rather than a human being's life to be considered. Just personal stuff, Maya said, forcing a smile that felt like a mask. Family issues, nothing that affects my work, I promise. Matthews didn't look convinced, but he nodded slowly. All right, but if you need to talk to someone, the Employee Assistance Program is there for a reason. And Maya, if something is affecting your ability to do your job safely, I need to know. Lives depend on everyone being focused and present, including yours. I understand, Sergeant. Thank you. The rest of Maya's shift passed in a blur of routine tasks that felt surreal, given the decision weighing on her mind. She conducted cell checks, processed meal deliveries, filled out incident reports for minor infractions, all while her thoughts circled endlessly around the same impossible question. Tell Sarah the truth, or let her keep the peace she'd found? At 4 o'clock, during her afternoon rounds, Maya found herself standing outside Marcus Williams's cell again. He was sitting on his bunk, reading a book, but he looked up immediately when she approached, as if he'd been waiting for her. "Officer Reynolds," he said quietly, setting the book aside. "I wasn't sure you'd come back. I talked to Detective Morrison," Maya said, keeping her voice low even though the corridor was empty. "He verified your story, every detail. He said you're telling the truth about what happened that night." Marcus nodded slowly, unsurprised. "I knew he would. Morrison's a good man who made a bad choice 15 years ago. He's been carrying that weight almost as long as Sarah's been carrying hers." He stood and walked to the bars, his tall frame casting shadows across the floor. "So now you know I'm not lying. Now you know Sarah Mitchell really has been living with guilt that isn't hers. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Maya wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold, despite the prison's perpetual stuffiness. "I don't know. Morrison said I need to decide whether truth or peace matters more, whether knowing will help Sarah or destroy her, and I can't figure out which one it would be. Can I tell you something about Sarah Mitchell that you won't find on Facebook or LinkedIn?" Marcus asked, his voice gentle despite the urgency beneath it. "Something I learned from watching her in the months after Tommy died, before she moved away and changed her name." "What?" Maya whispered. Marcus gripped the bars, his knuckles pressing white against his dark skin. "Sarah Mitchell tried to take her own life 3 times in the year after Tommy died. 3 times she decided the guilt was too much to carry, that the world would be better without her in it, that she didn't deserve to keep breathing when her son couldn't. 3 times someone found her in time and got her help, and each time she survived and kept living with that crushing weight of false guilt." Maya felt tears burning in her eyes, not from manipulation, but from the sheer tragedy of what Marcus was describing. A woman so consumed by guilt for something she didn't do that she'd repeatedly chosen death over continuing to carry that burden. "She got therapy eventually," Marcus continued. "Medication, support groups. She learned to live with what she thought was unforgivable. She found ways to make meaning from tragedy, which is why she teaches 3rd grade now, kids the same age Tommy was when he died. She's trying to give other children the love and attention and care she thinks she failed to give her own son. She's trying to earn forgiveness from a ghost who has nothing to forgive her for. So telling her the truth would be mercy?" Maya asked, wanting him to make this choice for her. But Marcus shook his head slowly. "I don't know if it would be mercy or cruelty, Officer Reynolds. That's why I asked you to decide instead of trying to demand you do it. Because this choice doesn't have a right answer. It has 2 wrong answers that are wrong in different ways, and you have to pick which wrong you can live with." Maya wiped at her eyes angrily, frustrated by her own tears and uncertainty. "Why me, Marcus? Why did you put this on me specifically? You could have asked the chaplain to deliver your message. You could have written directly to Sarah. Why make me the one who has to decide whether she deserves to know? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, seeming to consider his answer carefully. Because you're young enough to still believe in truth, but old enough to understand consequences. Because you haven't been broken by this system yet, but you've been in it long enough to see its flaws. Because you're standing exactly where I was standing 15 years ago, knowing something terrible, and having to decide whether knowing makes things better or worse. He paused, his expression pained. And because I'm dying, Officer Reynolds, I'm dying, and I don't want to take this secret to my grave without at least giving one person the chance to do what I never could. Give Sarah Mitchell the truth she deserves, even if she doesn't know she deserves it. Dorsey said that evening Maya drove to Austin without quite deciding she was going to do it. She told herself she was just driving, just thinking, just needing to get out of her apartment where the walls felt like they were closing in. She told herself that even if she ended up on Maple Street, she wouldn't get out of her car. She'd just look at the house, just see the place where Sarah Mitchell had built her new life, and then drive home and forget this whole impossible situation. But when she pulled up in front of 1247 Maple Street at 7:30 in the evening, the sun setting behind the small blue house with white trim, exactly as Marcus had described, Maya found herself turning off the engine. Found herself sitting in her car, staring at the garden full of roses that someone had clearly spent hours tending. Found herself watching through the front window as Sarah Mitchell moved through her living room, laughing at something, her daughter Emma spinning in circles the way 8-year-olds do when happiness overtakes them. This was the life Marcus wanted her to potentially destroy with truth. This scene of ordinary domestic happiness, hard-won after years of therapy and grief and rebuilding, was what hung in the balance of her decision. Maya's hand reached for her door handle, then stopped, reached again, then stopped. She'd driven all this way without deciding what she would do if she actually came face to face with Sarah Mitchell. Would she introduce herself as the prison officer carrying a message from a dying man? Would she explain that everything Sarah believed about the worst night of her life was a lie? Would she hand over Marcus's letter and watch this woman's carefully reconstructed world crumble in real time? Before she could decide, the front door opened. Sarah Mitchell stepped out onto the porch, having apparently noticed the strange car parked in front of her house for the past 10 minutes. She was wearing jeans and a purple sweatshirt, her blonde hair loose around her shoulders, and her expression was curious rather than concerned. Maya could see Emma peering out from behind her mother, those dark curls bouncing as she tried to get a better look. Sarah walked down the porch steps and approached Maya's car with the cautious friendliness of someone who lived in a safe neighborhood, but still maintained reasonable awareness. Maya had no choice now but to roll down her window and face whatever came next. "Can I help you with something?" Sarah asked, her voice warm and slightly concerned. "You've been sitting out here for a while. Are you lost? Do you need directions somewhere?" Maya opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She was looking into the eyes of a woman who'd survived unimaginable tragedy and guilt, who'd rebuilt a life worth living despite believing herself responsible for her son's death, and Maya couldn't decide if the truth would free this woman or destroy her all over again. Maya started, her voice shaking. "I'm sorry, I think I have the wrong address." The coward's choice? The easy choice. The choice that let Maya drive away and leave Sarah Mitchell living in ignorance that looked exactly like the happiness she deserved but had been denied for 15 years. Sarah tilted her head, studying Maya's face with the assessing gaze of a teacher who'd learned to read children's emotions but could apply that skill to adults too. "Are you sure? You look like you have something important to say. Like you drove all the way here specifically to tell me something." She smiled gently. "It's okay. Whatever it is, you can say it. I promise I won't bite." And in that moment, looking at Sarah Mitchell's kind, open face, seeing the hard-won peace in her expression and the genuine warmth in her smile, Maya made her decision. "My name is Maya Reynolds," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'm an officer at Huntsville Unit, and I have a letter for you from a man named Marcus Williams. He asked me to deliver it before. She paused, choosing her words carefully. Before his time runs out." Sarah's expression shifted from friendly curiosity to confusion, the name Marcus Williams clearly meaning nothing to her. "I don't know anyone named Marcus Williams. Are you sure this letter is meant for me?" Maya reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out the folded paper that had changed everything, the letter she'd read dozens of times, but would now pass on to the person it was always meant for. "He said you wouldn't know his name, but he knew yours. He knew about Tommy, and he said he knows what really happened the night your son was hurt." The color drained from Sarah's face so quickly, Maya thought she might collapse. Sarah's hand shot out to grip the car door for support, her knuckles going white with the force of her grip. Behind her on the porch, Emma called out something about dinner being ready, her child's voice cutting through the suddenly heavy air. "Just a minute, baby," Sarah called back, her voice remarkably steady considering the shock on her face. Then quietly, looking directly at Maya with eyes that suddenly seemed much older, "What do you mean, he knows what really happened? Everyone knows what happened. I left my son alone, and someone broke in, and Tommy got hurt because I wasn't there to protect him. That's what happened." "That's what you've been told happened," Maya said gently, extending the letter toward Sarah. "But Marcus Williams says there's more to the story. Things you don't know. Things he thinks you deserve to know after all these years." Sarah stared at the letter like it was a snake that might bite her. Her hand trembled as she slowly reached out to take it, but she didn't unfold it. Didn't look at it, just held it against her chest like a shield or a burden. Who is Marcus Williams? Why would he know anything about that night? "He was there," Maya said simply. "Not inside your house, but close enough to see things that didn't make it into police reports. Close enough to witness truth that got buried or ignored or disbelieved. And now, before he dies, he wants you to have that truth. Whether you read it or not, whether you believe it or not, that's your choice. But he wanted to make sure you at least had the option to know." Tears were running down Sarah's face now, though her expression hadn't changed, as if her body was reacting before her mind could process what was happening. "I spent 15 years accepting what I did. 15 years in therapy, learning to live with my guilt. 15 years building a life where I could function despite believing I failed my son in the worst possible way. And now you're telling me there's more to the story? That maybe everything I've believed, everything I've based my entire life on, might not be true? I'm telling you that Marcus Williams has information you didn't have," Maya said carefully. "Information that he believes you deserve to know. What you do with that information is entirely up to you." Sarah looked back at her house, at Emma still visible in the window, probably wondering why her mother was having such an intense conversation with a stranger in a car. When she looked back at Maya, her expression had hardened into something that looked like anger mixed with fear. "If what's in this letter changes everything I believe about that night, if it tells me my guilt was misplaced or wrong, or based on lies, then what was the point of the last 15 years? What was the point of all that therapy, all that pain, all that work, to forgive myself for something I might not have even done?" Her voice rose slightly, emotion breaking through. "How is that information supposed to help me, Officer Reynolds? How is learning I've been carrying false guilt for 15 years supposed to make anything better?" It was the same question Morrison had asked. The same question Maya had been asking herself, and she still didn't have a good answer. "I don't know if it will make things better," Maya admitted honestly, "but Marcus believes you deserve the truth even if it's painful. He believes that living with accurate pain is better than living with false guilt. And he asked me to give you the choice whether to know or not, because no one gave you that choice 15 years ago." Sarah stood in the fading twilight, holding the letter that contained either liberation or devastation, her face a mask of conflicting emotions. From inside the house, Emma called again, her voice taking on the whiny edge of a hungry child losing patience. "I need to go," Sarah said abruptly. "I need to feed my daughter and get her ready for bed and do all the normal things that make up our life. I need to not think about this right now." "I understand," Maya said, though she felt a crushing sense of disappointment. She'd driven all this way, made her choice to tell Sarah the truth, and now the woman was walking away without reading the letter. "But please, when you're ready, read what Marcus wrote. Even if it changes everything, even if it makes things harder before they get better, he believed you deserved to know." Sarah nodded slowly, tucking the letter into her sweatshirt pocket without looking at it. "Can I ask you something, Officer Reynolds?" "Of course. Did you read this letter? Do you know what it says?" "Yes," Maya admitted. "I read it multiple times. I had to verify it was true before I agreed to deliver it." "And is it true? Is whatever Marcus Williams says in here, is it actually true? Or is it just the delusions of a dying man looking for meaning in his final hours?" Maya met her eyes directly, needing Sarah to see the certainty in her face. "Detective James Morrison, the investigator who worked your son's case, verified every detail Marcus provided. It's true, Sarah, all of it." Sarah's face crumpled slightly, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "Then I'm not ready to read it. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. Because if what you're saying is true, if this letter really does change everything, then I need time to prepare for my entire world to shift. I need time to shore up my foundations before someone comes and tells me they were built on lies." She turned and walked back toward her house, moving like someone carrying an enormous weight. At the porch steps, she paused and looked back at Maya. "If Marcus Williams dies before I'm ready to read this, will you tell him something for me?" "Of course," Maya said, her throat tight. "Tell him thank you for caring enough to send it, but also tell him that sometimes the truth comes too late to heal the wounds it's meant to address. Sometimes the scars have already formed, and reopening them does more harm than good. Tell him I'll read it when I'm ready, but I can't promise when that will be, or what I'll do with the information once I have it." Then she went inside, closing the door gently but firmly, leaving Maya sitting in her car on a quiet Austin street, wondering if she'd just made everything better or infinitely worse. Through the window, she could see Sarah moving through her evening routine, helping Emma set the table, pouring drinks, performing all the small acts of motherhood that must feel both precious and painful when you've lost one child and been blessed with another. Maya started her car and drove away, the image of Sarah Mitchell burning into her memory. A woman who'd survived impossible guilt and was now being asked to survive impossible truth. A woman who deserved better than what life had given her, but had made something beautiful anyway. A woman whose story wasn't over yet, whose choice about whether to read Marcus's letter would determine how the next chapter of her life unfolded. As Maya merged onto the highway back to Huntsville, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. She glanced at it at a red light and felt her stomach drop. It was from Detective Morrison. "Marcus's condition declined this afternoon. Doctors say he might not make it through the night. If you delivered the letter, you should let him know. He deserves to know he kept his promise before he goes." Maya pressed harder on the accelerator, suddenly desperate to get back to the prison, to tell Marcus Williams that she'd done what he'd asked, that she'd given Sarah Mitchell the choice he'd never been able to give her himself, that whatever happened next, at least he could die knowing the truth was finally available to the person who needed it most. Maya made it back to Huntsville Unit at 9:30, bypassing normal protocol and heading straight to Block D where Marcus Williams was held. She found the medical team already in his cell, checking vitals, adjusting IV lines, speaking in the low tones that medical professionals use when time is running short. Sergeant Matthews was there too, standing outside the cell with a grim expression. "Reynolds," he said when he saw her rushing down the corridor. "What are you doing here? You're not on shift." "I need to talk to Marcus Williams," Maya said, slightly out of breath from running from the parking lot. "It's important. I have information he's been waiting for." Matthews studied her face, seeming to make calculations about protocol versus compassion. "He's not doing well, Reynolds. The doctors say he's stable for now, but it could go either way. If you have something to tell him, make it quick and don't upset him." Maya nodded and waited while the medical team finished their examination and moved past her with sympathetic nods. Then she stepped up to the cell bars where Marcus Williams lay on his bunk, looking frailer than he had just hours ago. His powerful frame seemed diminished, as if the urgency that had sustained him was finally giving way to the illness that had been waiting to claim him. "Officer Reynolds," he said, his voice weak, but his eyes sharp and alert. "You came back. Does that mean—" "I delivered the letter," Maya said, moving closer to the bars so she could speak quietly. "I drove to Sarah Mitchell's house. I told her who I was and why I was there. I gave her your letter, Marcus. I gave her the choice to know the truth." Marcus's eyes closed, and for a moment Maya thought he'd lost consciousness. But then she saw tears sliding down his cheeks, silent and steady. Did she read it? Does she know what really happened? "Not yet," Maya admitted. "She said she needs time, that she's not ready to have everything she believes challenged all at once. But she has the letter, Marcus. She has your truth. And when she's ready, she'll know that she's been carrying guilt that was never hers to bear." Marcus opened his eyes and looked at her with an expression of profound relief mixed with regret. "I wish I'd done this 15 years ago. I wish I'd been brave enough then to make sure she knew. Maybe she wouldn't have suffered so long. Maybe she could have started healing from the real wound instead of the false one." "You were a different person 15 years ago," Maya said gently. "You didn't have the resources or the support or the standing to make people listen. But you remembered, Marcus. For 15 years you carried this truth, and in your final days you made sure it reached the person who needed it. That counts for something." "Does it count enough?" Marcus asked, his voice barely audible now. "Does it balance the scales for all the other things I did wrong, all the other choices I made that hurt people?" Maya didn't have an answer to that. She wasn't a chaplain or a philosopher, or someone qualified to judge whether one act of compassionate truth-telling could redeem a lifetime of mistakes. But she could offer him something else. "Sarah asked me to tell you something," Maya said. "She said to thank you for caring enough to send the letter. She said she'll read it when she's ready, and that even if the timing isn't perfect, she's grateful someone thought she deserved to know the truth." More tears slid down Marcus's face, but his expression relaxed slightly, as if a burden he'd carried for 15 years was finally being lifted. "That's enough," he whispered. "That's more than enough. Thank you, Officer Reynolds. Thank you for being brave enough to do what I couldn't do and what Morrison wouldn't do. Thank you for giving her the choice." Marcus Williams died 3 days later, peacefully in his sleep according to the medical staff, though Maya suspected peacefully was a generous description of any death in a prison cell. She attended the small memorial service held in the prison chapel, one of only 6 people there, including the chaplain who conducted the service. Detective Morrison came, standing in the back with his hands clasped and his head bowed. A public defender who'd represented Marcus years ago showed up out of what seemed like professional obligation, and 2 other inmates who'd known Marcus came to pay their respects, their presence a reminder that even in places designed for punishment, human connections still formed. The chaplain spoke about redemption and second chances, about how every person carried both light and darkness, and about how Marcus had used his final days to try to bring truth to light. Maya listened and wondered if Marcus had found peace in those final 72 hours, knowing he'd done what he could to correct an old wrong, even if the correction came far too late to erase the damage. After the service, Morrison approached her in the parking lot. "Have you heard anything from Sarah Mitchell?" he asked without preamble. "No," Maya admitted. "I've thought about calling or driving back to her house, but I don't want to pressure her. She said she'd read the letter when she was ready, and I have to respect that." Morrison nodded slowly. "That's probably wise. This kind of truth can't be forced. It has to be invited when the person is strong enough to handle it." He paused, looking up at the cloudy sky. For what it's worth, Reynolds, I think you did the right thing. I spent 15 years choosing institutional safety over individual truth, and it ate at me every single day. At least now Sarah has the option to know, even if she never exercises that option. At least the truth exists somewhere outside of sealed case files and buried reports. Do you think she'll read it? Maya asked, voicing the question that had haunted her for the past 3 days. Eventually, Morrison said, with the confidence of someone who'd spent decades understanding human nature. Maybe not today or next week, or even next month, but eventually, curiosity will win. The need to know will overcome the fear of knowing. And eventually, Morrison said with confidence. Maybe not today or next week, but eventually curiosity will win. The need to know will overcome the fear of knowing. And when she reads it, she'll finally understand that Tommy's death wasn't her fault. That's worth something, even if it comes 15 years late. 3 weeks passed, with no word from Sarah Mitchell. Maya returned to her normal routines at Huntsville, processing new inmates, conducting cell checks, filing reports. But part of her mind remained in Austin, wondering if Sarah had opened that letter yet, wondering if the truth had set her free, or simply added another layer of complexity to her grief. Then on a Tuesday morning during her day off, Maya's phone rang with an unfamiliar Austin number. Her heart raced as she answered. "Officer Reynolds, this is Sarah Mitchell. I read the letter." Maya sat down heavily on her couch, her legs suddenly unsteady. "When?" "Last night. I couldn't sleep, and it was sitting in my drawer where I'd hidden it, and I needed to know. I needed to stop being afraid of the truth." Sarah's voice was thick with emotion, but steady. "Marcus Williams was right, about everything. Patricia lied to me. Her son Kyle was there, and I've been carrying guilt for 15 years that was never mine." "How do you feel?" Maya asked carefully. Sarah laughed, but it was a sound without humor. "I don't know. Angry, relieved, confused, devastated. Free, all of it at once. I keep thinking about all those years of therapy, all those nights crying myself to sleep, all those moments when I looked at Emma and wondered if I deserved to be her mother after failing Tommy so completely. And it was all based on a lie. I'm so sorry, Sarah." "Don't be sorry," Sarah said firmly. "Marcus gave me something precious, even if it hurts. He gave me the truth, and now I can finally actually grieve for Tommy without the guilt poisoning everything. I can remember him without hating myself. Do you understand how enormous that is?" Maya did understand. She understood that sometimes truth was the only path to real healing, even when that truth came too late to prevent years of unnecessary suffering. "There's something else," Sarah continued, "something I need to do now that I know the truth, and I'm going to need your help." 2 months later, Maya stood in a small community center in Austin, watching Sarah Mitchell address a room full of mothers who'd lost children. It was a support group Sarah had been attending for years, but tonight she was sharing her story publicly for the first time, telling the complete truth about Tommy's death and the 15 years of false guilt she'd carried. "I want you to understand something," Sarah said, her voice strong and clear. "For 15 years, I believed I was the worst kind of mother, the kind who fails her child at the moment he needs her most. I carried that belief into every relationship, every job, every moment with my daughter Emma. It shaped everything about who I became." The room was silent, women leaning forward in their chairs, connected by shared grief. "But 2 months ago, I learned that the story I'd been telling myself was based on a lie, that the guilt I carried wasn't mine, that I had been betrayed by someone I trusted, and that betrayal had cost me 15 years of unnecessary suffering." Sarah paused, her eyes scanning the room. "And I'm telling you this not to diminish anyone's genuine guilt or responsibility, but to say this: sometimes the stories we tell ourselves about our failures aren't accurate. Sometimes we carry burdens that aren't ours. And sometimes the bravest thing we can do is question whether the guilt we're carrying is actually justified." After the meeting, several women approached Sarah with tears in their eyes, thanking her for her courage. Maya watched from the back of the room, seeing how Sarah's truth had given others permission to examine their own stories, their own guilt, their own beliefs about what they could have done differently. "Thank you for bringing me Marcus's letter," Sarah said when she finally made it over to Maya. "Thank you for being brave enough to disrupt my comfortable lies. It's been the hardest and best thing anyone's ever done for me." "Marcus deserves the credit," Maya said. "He's the one who held on to the truth for 15 years. He's the one who made sure you finally got it." Sarah nodded, her eyes distant. "I wish I could thank him. I wish I could tell him that his final act of compassion changed my life. But I suppose that's not how these things work. We don't always get to thank the people who save us." "No," Maya agreed, "but we can honor them by using what they gave us, by living differently because of their truth." Sarah smiled, and for the first time since Maya had met her, it was a smile free of the shadow of guilt. "That's exactly what I intend to do." 6 months after Marcus Williams' death, Maya received a package at the prison. Inside was a children's book titled The Truth That Sets Us Free, written by S.M. Patterson and illustrated with beautiful, hopeful images. A note was tucked inside the front cover. "Dear Officer Reynolds, I wrote this book in honor of Marcus Williams and the gift he gave me. It's about a little girl who learns that sometimes the stories we believe about ourselves aren't true, and that discovering the real truth, even when it's painful, is the only way to truly heal. I'm donating copies to children's hospitals and grief counseling centers. I want Marcus's final act of compassion to ripple outward, helping others find the courage to question their false guilt. Thank you for being the bridge between his truth and my freedom. With gratitude, Sarah." Maya held the book for a long time, thinking about Marcus Williams in his cell, about the choice he'd given her, about the impossible decision that had turned out to be exactly right. She thought about how one act of courage in the final hours of a life could change the trajectory of another life entirely. That evening, she drove to the small cemetery where Marcus had been buried, his grave marked with a simple stone that listed his name and dates, but said nothing about who he'd been or what he'd done. She placed the children's book on the grass beside the marker. "You did it, Marcus," she said quietly to the stone. "You kept your promise. You gave Sarah the truth, and she's using it to help others. Your final act mattered. It mattered more than you probably ever imagined it could." The wind rustled through the trees surrounding the cemetery, and Maya felt a sense of peace settle over her. Not the peace of easy answers or simple choices, but the peace that comes from knowing you did something difficult because it was right, even when right was complicated and messy and came with no guarantees. She stayed until the sun set, thinking about truth and mercy, about justice and compassion, about the impossible choices that define us and the courage it takes to make them. If stories of redemption and humanity touch your heart, please like this video and subscribe. It helps us continue sharing these powerful stories of transformation and hope, where one person's courage to tell the truth can change another person's entire life. These are the stories that remind us that it's never too late to do the right thing, and that sometimes the smallest acts of compassion create ripples that extend far beyond what we can imagine.